Listeners, beware. This podcast contains themes of the macabre and does not shy away from the details. Our content is graphic and our language is colorful. We might not be your cup of tea, so listener discretion is strongly advised. To decipher the deeply demented minds of murderers.
Welcome to The Killer Tea, episode 15, Keith Hunter Jesperson, the Happy Face Killer.
We are your hosts, Christina,
Chelsea,
and me, Tara.
And special guest, Tara! She's back for
I'm
more
back.
bullshit.
You can't get rid of me.
No, well, we had to bring Tara back for this episode because the only reason why I know about Keith is because...
That's my fault.
Yeah, when once upon a time in a land far, far away, I poached my friends from their actual other jobs to make them all work with me.
So we could sing Rush around the office.
Yes.
and discuss true crime podcasts in very loud, carrying voices.
Down the hallway.
We converted Chelsea into somebody who likes murder.
Yeah.
I mean, I always was interested in, like, psychology and abnormal psychology.
But now you're like, yeah, that murder, though.
But now I'm like,
but now that murder, though.
That murder, though. It's like that ass, but with murder.
Yeah. So, Tara introduced us to the Happy Face podcast, which do you guys remember who that's actually by?
Well, it's with Keith's oldest daughter, Melissa. And then I'm blanking.
What was Laura Tompkins? Was that her?
Lauren Bright Pacheco.
Okay. If you haven't heard of that podcast, check it out. It's definitely worth your time, and it's a very fast podcast. You can get through it in about
a day.
I
binged it in a day.
Yeah.
I really love that podcast, though, because you get to hear from Melissa, which is Keith's daughter, and what her experience was growing up with Keith, and then finding out later in life that, hey, your dad's like real fucked up.
Well, and they interview Melissa's mother, who was married to Keith for 14 years.
It was just fascinating. It's a fascinating podcast.
And the son of his last victim.
Oh God, that part was so hard.
I don't want to ruin it.
I don't want to ruin it, but oh my God, that was hard.
Heartbreaking.
We'll circle back to that.
Yeah, full circle. So for the next hour, me, Chelsea, and Tara will be the purveyors of some very interesting, depressing, and fucked up bullshit.
Yeah, this is a two-parter.
Yes,
this
is going to be a two-part episode.
Yes, so welcome to
part one.
Yeah, part one of the bullshit, and I'm already, we're just gonna...
You're starting with your cool down here. I need one to talk.
We're gonna just start with this because the childhood is fucked up, so...
Yes, which is where we're starting, with Keith's childhood.
All right, Chelsea.
You want me to set the scene?
You are the note master. Why don't
right.
you go ahead and fucking start this shit off the right way?
30 pages of bullshit. Here we go.
Keith Hunter Jesperson was born on April 6, 1955 in Chilliwack, British Columbia.
Say that town again.
Chilliwack?
Say it with your sexy voice.
Chilliwack.
There it is. Continue.
My goodness.
He was the middle of 5 children. His siblings were Bruce, Brad, Sharon, and Jill, and his parents were Leslie or Les and Gladys Jesperson. And Les, dun dun, surprise, he's an abusive alcoholic.
Oh my God, no way!
Are you shocked?
I'm so shocked.
I feel like that needs one of those, like, faces.
Like Home Alone moments.
I hope that picked that up, where I smacked myself in the face.
Smacked yourself in the face. Oh my God. So we are 15 episodes in, and if we've fucking learned anything about how to make a murderer, alcoholism and being an abusive piece of shit is a surefire fucking way.
I mean,
since we're in Canada.
It starts in Canada.
It starts in Canada. Pitter patter, let's get at her, let's get going.
I am not starting with a Canadian accent. It will not go away.
The Jespersons, I think, to just go back, are a clan of a proud folk.
Yeah, they
proud of their drink.
There's a lot of accomplishments that did happen here.
Well, I mean, Les in himself was a very brilliant and very highly intelligent man. He just was an alcoholic, and to be fair, he was only raising his children in the only way that he knew how. That was how he was raised. That was how all the other Jespersons were raised. He was raising his children the best way that he knew how.
Les is the son of Arthur Jesperson, who was the father of 6.
Yes.
Les had 5 other siblings, and they lived in rural Canada.
Yep.
They had this farm life, and their dad, a lot of what Les learned, he learned from his dad. His dad was a farm inventor. He invented all kinds of stuff. Everything that he possibly could, he made with his own bare hands. And from the time that the kids were school age, they were working alongside him.
Right.
And if they whined, fussed, complained, or didn't work hard, they would get beaten.
Well, you have to think, like, this is during the era of when the United States was going through the Great Depression. Canada is our neighbor to the north, and I'm sure they were also experiencing...
Well, it's not even the Great Depression, it's the Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
So what was happening in the Dust Bowl with the prairie lands in both America and Canada,
Right.
people were starving to death. They couldn't grow anything. And because they were a family of farmers, I mean...
It was really hard for them.
It hindered them immensely.
I love that the notes say the dirty 30s.
So the dirty 30s are what our neighbors to the north, our little hat, likes to call the Dust Bowl.
Sorry, I saw that and got excited. I was like, oh, dirty 30s.
So, I mean, we're all in our dirty 30s right now. I feel like we can
yeah.
talk about it.
It's fine.
So this was a period of severe dust storms that caused major agricultural damage to America and Canada, specifically the prairie lands from the 1930s to like the 1940s is pretty much where it stopped. So Arthur had moved his family down to Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan. I'm pretty sure they don't do this.
Saskatchewan to build a better life for his family and make more money and yada yada yada, and then Dust Bowl.
Yes.
And then starvation and famine, and
Anger.
so yes, Elder Jesperson gets kicked between the nuts, and he has to go back up to British Columbia.
Well, he doesn't take this very well. He
No.
doesn't accept failure as an option, and when he does, not by his own fault, but when he does fail at this, he takes it really personally and basically never recovers from it.
So one thing that one of the Jesperson, like one of the rumors of the Jesperson family was that because Arthur had to provide his family via like groundhogs and vermin, essentially, to eat, to live, to survive, that stuck with him. And from that point on, the family describes it as being plagued by being money hungry and money grubbing.
Yes.
And that's something that like all of the Jespersons since have kind of inherited.
Definitely see that with Keith later in life.
Yes.
We'll come back to that.
But I mean, and Les even takes that into how he raises his children, because he is always doing businesses and creating and inventing and finding more ways to make more and more money for his family. He's very much in that thought of like, he's a provider.
Well, he's also wants that level of control.
Yes.
Which you see later.
It is money for him is control. I agree wholeheartedly with that. He was carrying on the way the whole family was.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of just their way of life. Okay, so Arthur, whatever, he's a stoic man. He continues to be a stoic man, teaches that to his son. None of them are ever really affectionate. And that's something that Keith talks about, that Les talks about. But more on that later. So by Keith's own admission, there wasn't much that Les couldn't do. His resume is insane.
He is very
He's very handy. He made a lot of his own farm tools and stuff.
even more than that, he was super into the hops industry.
I didn't hear that part.
Oh yeah, it was in the book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he was just genius with making equipment and like production line things.
Yeah, so he taught himself mechanical and industrial engineering, which
Who could just teach themselves that? But
I mean,
all
he was
right.
very smart.
Yeah, it was with a 10th grade education.
Yeah, he dropped out of school and then taught himself how to be an engineer.
Some people are just really good with that.
I guess.
I'm really good with people. I really suck with numbers. He was really good with machines.
Don't make me do the math. Not
I got a
the
calculator.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Not happening. So he had several patents. He was an inventor. He was a writer, a poet, an artist. He had art that was in the local museums.
He was also a politician.
Yeah, and
he was part of the local chamber. I mean, he really had his hands in
all
everything.
Of the things. Yeah. So, of course, this patriarch, he's the patriarch of the family, and Keith and everybody else put Les up on this pedestal. Even though he's an alcoholic
And abusive.
And let's talk about the treatment of the fucking animals.
Oh, let's talk about Gladys first.
Okay,
Let's talk about the treatment of his wife. So,
speaking of inherited other douchebaggy traits.
So let's just say that the Jesperson men firmly believed that women just took up space.
Yeah.
They were there for one thing.
Moving furniture. I mean, knocking boots. I mean, you know what I mean.
Whatever analogy you want to use for it.
Whatever the Canadians say.
Basically, women
What
were
do Canadians say for knocking
Making
boots?
syrup? I don't know.
Can we call our Canadian correspondent?
Our Canadian correspondent.
I don't know. She hasn't been in Canada for a while. We could call our other Canadian correspondent, but we won't get the phone for like an hour.
Fucking terror.
I'm just being honest. Maybe. Hang on. Let me. I'm gonna shoot out a lifeline.
Oh God.
I'm gonna text it though.
We can
I'm not gonna call
insert this
it.
later.
Yeah, we'll insert this later.
So, basically, the Jesperson men believe that women are good for procreating and cooking, cleaning, and
making bacon.
that's it.
There it is. Making
Bacon. And unfortunately, they just don't respect women the way that, well, anyone frankly should. But this is something repeated in his grandfathers. It's repeated in his dad and his uncles. And now, Keith is kind of inheriting it.
Yes, he's inheriting this bias on how you treat women. I mean, and yes, this is the 1950s, and we all know how children and women were treated in the 1950s. But this is
like lower than farm animals.
This is more aggressive, though. This isn't whooping your child for being bad. This is controlling every aspect of your child's life.
And Les and Gladys would have blowout fights. He would cut telephone lines.
That is so fucking creepy.
So she couldn't call for help. Like, that's fucked up. Because then you have to repair that telephone line. How many times did you do that?
I mean, Keith, by his own admission, doesn't know if his father actually ever hit his mother, but the fights were very...
Why else would you cut telephone lines?
I don't know, but the fights were very volatile.
Gladys, I think, is an interesting juxtaposition to Les.
Yes.
So Les is not religious, actually adamantly does not want anything to do with religion in their family. And Gladys is from a strictly Protestant
household.
Her family, what was it? They turned away a friend who tried to bring over Christmas liquor to them as a present, and they were like, fuck you, guy.
They
free
were
booze.
What? Frick you, sir. No, this is the Lord's house.
No,
Lord's
Gladys was much more warm and inviting and a much more like stereotypical maternal figure when you think of it that way. And Keith vividly remembers that if his mother hadn't been the way that she was, he doesn't know if any of the children would have survived Les.
She was the glue that held everybody together.
Yeah.
She was kind of the buffer of Les's anger.
Yeah,
Yes,
she was
except
very
for
much
Keith.
so.
She was the only one that could really like rein him in a little bit.
Well, and I feel like a lot of the time she probably took the attention away from him being angry at the kids and more directed it herself to try to protect the kids, with the exception of Keith, who got a lot of Les's anger.
Well, let's be honest. Keith was really singled out by Les. I mean, and who knows why exactly, but Keith was definitely treated far worse than his siblings.
Yeah.
So while Les was an abusive asshole, Keith really got the brunt of it.
I just want to comment on one more thing about Gladys, because I think it plays this weird role into Keith in its own way is Gladys was very modest, and even Les never saw her naked, even in their married life.
They had 6 kids or 5 kids. How did he never see her naked?
She had sex with the clothes on. She never got naked. Les has been on record for Jack Olson, the author of The Creation of a Serial Killer, saying that her family raised her to be ashamed of her body. So no matter what, nobody went into her bedroom, nobody ever saw her naked, and sex straight up was not discussed.
Like it was for one purpose only. It wasn't for fun.
It was very taboo.
That was a sad life.
Yes. Yes. Yes,
well,
indeed.
I mean, they said that it wasn't discussed and that the children were expected to learn about sex and like procreating via the farm animals.
Great example.
Which is fucking weird.
Well, we're gonna get to that. that comes up again in a minute.
One of the many fucking things that are
Aren't
weird
you guys
about
just
this
so excited for this episode? We have set such a good tone.
I know, seriously. This little mess of people that we have given birth to 2 older sisters, two older siblings, Keith, and then 2 younger siblings.
Right.
I just had a thought.
What's that?
I'm wondering if Keith was the brunt of Les's anger because he was the last boy.
He wasn't. Brad was younger than him.
I thought he was the middle.
It went Bruce, Sharon, Keith, Brad, Jill.
Okay. I was reading there. I was like, oh shit, was he the middle?
No.
I never paid that much attention to it. Okay, we'll cut that part.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Keith rubbed him the wrong way.
Or maybe he was timid.
Well, I know
He could have been softer than his other siblings.
I know that they said that Keith was like an adorable little boy. Like he was super cuddly and super sweet as a little boy, and had all like this mop of curly blonde hair and was just, you know, this little love bug. But Keith also lived in his own world.
So I kind of wonder, personally, if Les saw himself in Keith.
It could be. I mean,
he was just trying to push him too fucking hard, and it pushed him over the edge.
I mean, Les did say that Keith was like Daddy's little helper.
Well, and then I also wonder, because like sometimes dads will have that mentality of like, oh, my son's acting too girly or too like weak, I need to toughen them up. And I wonder if maybe that's what Les was trying to do.
I don't know.
And it just, the way that Keith's brain is wired, it just went wrong.
Regardless, I think all of this stuff in his childhood, I know that with Keith and Jack Olson working together and creating that book, Keith becomes an authority on his story, but Jack is still there commenting along the way to like help the reader get back on track, because if you take Keith at his word and believe him to be...
If you cut out everything that Jack said, if you got rid of all of Jack's commentary...
Real fantastic story.
It would be... You would almost believe that Keith hadn't done the horrible things that he did.
The way he justifies it.
Yeah. It's really, really crazy how Keith in his mind is like, I did this because of this.
I've been taken advantage of all of my entire life, and this was the last time before I snapped.
Yeah.
Well, and I know a lot of the listeners of your guys' podcast love the psychology, so listen to that freaking book, because holy shit.
If you really want to do a deep dive into Keith after listening to these next 2 episodes, listening to Happy Face podcast with his daughter will blow your mind. And then getting the book Creation of a Serial Killer by Jack Olson will just...
It'll throttle you.
It's $14.95 on audible.com, and it's worth every single penny.
Yeah.
Especially if you think that you are someone who can read people well.
Yeah.
It will challenge your empathy.
Yeah.
He has a lot of Kemper vibes.
Yes, very much so. I think his intelligence is greatly underestimated, and
100%.
once he has all that time in prison is when you finally get to see more of it. But more on that later.
We digress.
Talking about Keith as a child. So,
Keith as a child, cute curly blonde hair.
Yeah, he was known for being a really happy, quiet, just like really good little boy. And he liked to play by himself, and his mom, Gladys, said that she never really had to worry about him. He'd be sitting outside playing in the mud by himself, not really bothering anybody. He
didn't really need constant attention to make sure he wasn't doing anything.
She said he was a really, really easy, laid-back child.
Keith described that his childhood would have been idyllic had it not been for his dad being present. And as much as we've talked a lot about the bad times, there were good times.
Oh, yeah.
There were a lot of good times, which I think is what created this duality in Keith with his relationship with his father. But even so me, Chelsea, and Tara all kind of grew up in more of a rural area.
Yeah.
And I know for me, when I think of an idyllic childhood, I think of the farms and the country life and simple things and fishing and creeks and all of that stuff. So even for me as a 30-year-old woman, I would agree with his observation that really that seems like a fantastic way to grow up until you throw in less.
So at the age of 5 is when we start to see some red flags with him. I'm hard pressed to say if this is just Keith or if this is his father's influence.
I think it's 100%
less.
I think it's less. I'm with Tara.
He begins killing animals as early as the age of 5. And Les
Hated cats.
hates cats. And so cats were kind of a big target for them.
God, that part of this whole fucking thing is so hard.
That was
so fucking hard.
That was the hardest part of getting through the Happy Face podcast was when Melissa was explaining that story when they were kids.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, I was just
We'll
like,
get to
that throttled me.
But yeah, so, Les is teaching the children that, there are vermins on a farm and those vermins need to be gotten rid of. And he didn't necessarily mean like go out and strangle a cat. Les is quoted in Jack Olson's book as saying that he would just put kittens like in a gunny sack and drown them. That was his method of disposing of quote unquote pests or shooting gophers with a rifle. That was what he meant, not what Keith was doing.
Yeah, but okay, putting kittens into gunny sacks is still fucking weird.
Oh, yeah, it's still terrible, but when you think of the times and then living on farms,
but the cats,
no way.
His
There's
justification
no way.
of getting rid of vermins, cats get rid of vermins. Cats are going to chase off all of those.
I don't understand the hatred of cats. I totally don't get the hatred of cats.
Because I think Les is kind of fucked up a little bit.
I have my own theory on that. Cats always want attention. Well, most cats. Some cats are the devil. Most cats always want attention. They want to be loved on. They want attention. Les didn't like that kind of behavior. Obviously, he never showed affection to his wife. He never showed affection to his kids.
I kind of think Les a little creepily enjoyed killing the animals, and I think it's something that he normalized and shared with his children, and normalized it under the pretense of
getting rid of vermin,
which is from like a farm. If you have a garden, if you have horses and you have a barn cats, like they're a lifesaver. Gophers are a problem. Rabbits are a problem, especially if you are in 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and you have victory gardens and all of that stuff. Like you need that food. But my grandpa would go out and take a gun and be done and over with, and then you dispose of them.
Drowning.
I mean, so Les used to take videos of the boys beating animals.
Yes.
And they would be like
fucking weird.
And they would be covered in blood from like beating gophers. And then he would show these videos to their future wives and be like, look at my little killers.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
He was normalizing that kind of behavior, which, I mean, maybe in the lifestyle he was raised in, that was fine, but as Keith's getting older and the times are changing, you have more readily available options than cats now.
I mean, this is my bias, but all I can think of is my great-grandma Rhea, who handmade all of my grandma's clothes and all of her kids' clothes, and if they had gotten blood all over their clothes while they were doing their farm work, like there's no, my great grandma was a hell hath no fury woman, and I can't even imagine that being like totally okay. And if Keith's mom was hand making all of their clothing and hand washing all of their stuff, I don't know, it just seems fucking weird.
Seems fucking weird.
But look at the
position that Gladys is in. She doesn't have a say. She doesn't have the room to be a hell hath no fury kind of woman.
No, because she's living with less.
Yeah.
She's living with
So
us.
I think it's interesting that Keith said that he actually became interested in sex at the age of 5 and had his first kiss at the age of 5, which I guess that in and of itself isn't so weird because
I mean, that's just a kid
that's
thing.
just a kid thing. They're just
Little boys
interested.
around that age, they start to realize there's things down there, and what's that?
Yeah. So here
You
it is.
laugh, but you know it's true.
It's very true.
You have that to look forward to.
But what's Ben's already there. He's like, Mom, look. And I'm like, I know,
Proudly
buddy.
strutting around the house. Okay, sorry.
Nothing like
Anyway.
talking about finding your genitals.
Yeah. You know. It's
Well,
fun,
it got
apparently.
real weird real fast for Keith.
Yeah, he began, quote unquote, practicing sex as young as the age of like 6.
Well,
and they would like touch and feel and kiss.
Well, and remember that they never talk to their kids about sex. So his practicing sex is witnessing whatever the farm animals are doing at 5, 6 years old.
Because he's hearing his parents having
Yes,
sex.
he is hearing the relations going between his parents, and he would sit outside the door and listen and try to figure out what the fuck was going on.
Yeah, you gotta be wondering. I mean, you never see affection between them, and then you hear all
Yeah,
these
you
noises.
hear all these weird sounds, and I think we are kind of wired to identify what those sounds are on like a weird primitive.
Over media now.
Well, it's all over media now, but I mean, back then, I think there's just something innate in us that identifies that
That guttural sound.
what is transpiring in your boudoir.
I don't know. With how much we like research murder, now I'm always like, are you dying or are you like having sex?
Oh God.
Just saying. Okay.
Things
Anyway.
are so creepy.
There's a fine line between creepy and normal.
Yeah, so, you know, Keith's sexual interests are peaked at a very young age, and that's kind of a theme with him.
Yeah, his whole life.
Yeah.
His whole life from that point.
So,
His whole identity.
yeah, that takes us to when he's about 8-ish, right? And Jesperson and his friend Martin would often get themselves into trouble. But Martin would always blame Keith for the trouble that they got into. And this little asshole was always believed, and Keith would get in huge fucking trouble, which would result in Les beating the shit out of him. Well, Keith finally has fucking enough of this and snaps and attacks Martin and starts beating the absolute shit out of Martin, and was like ready to, like, prepared to beat him to death until Les pulled him off of him.
Now, keep in mind, that's Keith's recollection of the
Yes.
events, which he has a tendency to elaborate on, so I don't know
But-
how much I put stock in that, but I believe that he probably beat the crap out of this kid and his dad beat him for it.
Yeah, well, Les commented on it later and said that he was a little shocked by the viciousness that Keith had displayed in this
He's like
fight.
the classic middle child
Yeah.
in a lot of
Middle
ways.
child, what are you trying to say?
Nothing. You're fine and perfect and pretty.
We love you so much.
Please don't kill me.
I'm not going to violently murder anyone, and I'm a middle child.
No. Yeah, I completely agree. Not all middle children
I mean,
murder people, but some do.
I did haul off and kick my brother really hard in the balls once, but he was fucking with me, and he had that coming.
Yeah.
So, but we'll move on.
You know?
More like Keith Hunter Jesperson. Sorry.
I
couldn't
am
resist.
nothing like Keith.
No, you're not. You're an angel.
I'm way shorter.
At what age, because I don't have the notes right in front of me, at what age does the almost molestation happen?
That's
coming
later.
It
It's
is
a little-
later?
It's a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Well, tune in for more on this next week.
at the
Sneak peek.
This next story is a really good. Oh my God.
Words are hard.
A really good example of Les's viciousness. So when Jesperson or Keith was 9, he got into a fight with a boy that was his age, right? They just got into a spat,
Like boys do.
like boys do, no big deal. So the boy's mother told him to get off her property, is cussing her head off. Well, Keith turns around and calls this woman a bitch. And her 16-year-old son had just pulled up, jumps out of his car, punched Jesperson, was kicking him with his pointy cowboy boots, and then ran his bike over. So this woman calls the cops. The cops call Les and are like, come get your boy.
And bear in mind, Les is a town official.
So Les is horribly embarrassed by this, comes and gets Keith, and then takes him into the house and starts beating the absolute shit out of him.
Unremorsefully. And Gladys and Keith are trying to stop him to explain what happened.
Yeah. And Les isn't listening to it and reportedly beat Keith until he couldn't scream anymore. Which I mean, there's disciplining your child,
and then there's taking it too far.
Then there's taking it way
because
too far.
Because you're embarrassed. Your
you're not going to be embarrassed taking your son in public with all these bruises. And
I know,
shit
but
now?
isn't that like, I don't know, that's something that I never understood.
To make it even worse, Keith's mom Gladys is like, it's not his fault, and is showing him the bruises from being kicked and punched by this older boy. And says to Les, don't you think you owe Keith an apology? And Les says he probably had a beating coming anyway.
So Keith is once again reminded that it's honorable to take the fall for other people by continually having to take the fall for other people.
Yep.
And that his dad, even when he needs him, is not going to be his advocate.
No.
And his mom is weak.
His mom.
Yeah.
She can't stand up.
Yeah.
No.
So I think this weakness of women imprints on Keith in a way.
Yeah.
So one thing that we definitely need to touch on is there is one person that Keith was super close to when he was a child, and that is his maternal grandfather, so his mom's dad.
And I did not know this until I read the book. So the Jack Olson book actually touched on a good chunk of this, which I thought probably was really, really important and somehow got skipped over in a lot of the information out there on Keith.
Yeah. He was really, really close to his grandfather, would go fishing, they would go on camping trips. I mean, and this grandfather was, a complete 180 from his father, and his paternal grandfather was very open and very loving and very caring.
And Keith could talk about his feelings.
Keith could talk about his feelings and be super open with him, but he unfortunately passed away when Keith was only 9.
And he left all of that boat that they used to go fishing on that was incredibly important to Keith. It held a lot of his favorite memories, and it was worth money. It was his to decide what to do with.
But Les sold it.
But Les sold it
to buy a different boat
for himself.
And Keith, in the Jack Olson book, actually reminisces and wonders how he would have turned out had his maternal grandfather been alive.
I mean, I don't think you can take whatever Keith says with a grain of salt, but I don't think it's wrong to kind of wonder how many of these little things could
have just changed the course of his life.
If he had a different predominant male in his life that was reinforcing the things that needed to be reinforced, who's to say that he wouldn't have been different? I mean, there's a couple things that transpire in his life that do make me wonder if it could have turned him the other way.
Well, and I always kind of look at like his siblings, and I mean, like, I know that that Keith says that a lot of Les's anger was directed at him, but again, this is all from Keith's point of view, and he tended to elaborate on some things. So it makes me wonder if, now we're going to be getting to the nitty-gritty part of this here soon, but it almost makes me wonder that if these other triggers in his life hadn't happened, if he wouldn't have turned out that way, even given his childhood.
Well, I mean, there is proof, though, that his father was harder on Keith and expected different things out of Keith than his brothers.
Even his sister Shannon went on record to say that
Les was harder.
Les was hard, period, because that was the thing of debate back and forth later on, was that Les and Keith would go viciously back and forth between each other saying, you did this, you did that. But Shannon did at one point in time, at least a little bit, shine light on some of the conversation.
Yeah, I know with the exception of Melissa, we don't hear a whole lot from the rest of the family except for those little excerpts from his book.
Yeah.
So we're going to hit another check box on how to create a serial killer
Yeah.
Checklist.
Trigger warning.
So, around the age of 10, Keith and some classmates were playing at like a dairyman's farm. And one of the workers forced Keith and some of his friends that he was with to strip their clothes. And he stripped his clothes off and said he was going to teach them about sex and wanted them to touch his genitals. Well, Keith grabbed his clothes and was like,
fuck this shit, I'm
fuck
out.
this shit, I'm out.
Well, when you're like, that's that whole thing playing out in the book.
Yeah.
I thought was interesting because the way the book kind of described it from Keith's perspective was he was so interested in learning about sex and couldn't get it anywhere else.
Right.
Like not sex itself, but the
Learning,
education.
yeah.
When this guy overheard him and his friend talking about it, he was like, "Oh, I'll teach you about it."
Right.
So he
And the
thought it was
kids-
going to be a learning experience.
Yeah, so the kids were like, "Oh, sweet, we're gonna learn about sex," not knowing about predators, not knowing about any of that stuff.
I don't think that was well known back then.
Yeah, so like, from what I was gathering from the book, there may have been some molestation that happened before Keith ran.
Oh, it's very possible, but what is really sad is that Keith left, but one of the boys that was in that group was actually raped by that man and then forced to keep quiet about it.
Well, he didn't even the little boy didn't even understand.
No.
Keith went to him later and was like, "So how was sex?
how
What was
it
sex like?"
happened.
And he was like, "It was actually
hurt."
really painful and horrible, and I didn't like it at all." And eventually, the little boy did come forward.
Yeah.
But he didn't even realize
What had happened?
what had happened to him.
that was not how it was supposed to happen.
So now this sex is taboo to Keith.
Yep.
And what his first real education in it is finding out that his friend was taken by force, and
Right.
then he may or may not have been molested. And then he's watching animals, which is a stud dominating a female animal.
Yeah.
So it's a taking and not a
A loving, giving
exchange. So all of his sexual education at this point is bad.
Yes.
It is not
Well,
good.
And then to build on the
violence.
violence against women, Keith's dad gave him a BB gun. And, typical boy has a BB gun. Well, he shot an overweight female neighbor who was bent over. I think she was picking raspberries or blueberries. And she went to Les to complain about this. And he was like, "Well, I don't believe you. Show me." And so when she did, he just laughed. And Keith didn't get punished for this.
So on one hand, he's getting viciously punished for trying to defend himself in a fight, and then he shoots a neighbor.
And is being, congratulated
Yeah.
for
Because it
shooting
was
a
a
woman?
And I think it's because she was a large woman.
Oh, I'm sure that
Yeah, because that
had.
comes back to play with Keith later in life too, with
Yeah.
the overweight.
So sadly, this only brings us to age 10.
Yeah.
We're only at age 10. We're not even into Keith being a teenager.
Now we are.
But this leads us into Keith's second quote-unquote murder attempt as a child. When Keith was 11, they were out swimming in a lake, and another boy held Keith under the water until he blacked out. And he was saved by a counselor, a camp counselor who was there at the lake. He was rescued. Well, Keith is pissed as shit about this. And when they're in a public pool, decides to get revenge on this boy and holds him underwater with every intention of drowning him. And a lifeguard sees what's going on and pulls Keith off of this other boy. And Keith, in his, when he's recalling this situation, he's like, yeah, I was gonna drown him.
Yeah.
Well,
He fully
he
intended
could
to
have he could have very easily had some anger management issues as a small child.
Well, and it doesn't help that as he's getting older, he's growing. He was very tall as an adult.
Yeah, we didn't
yeah.
touch on that. So Gladys was 5'12". Her Les was 5'11".
5'12"?
Yeah. 6 foot.
6 foot. Sorry.
Numbers are hard.
Fuck off. So Gladys was 6 foot, 5'11", 6 foot, around there.
Yeah.
And then
Les was right around the same. But Keith ended up maturing to 6 foot 6 inches of height.
Yeah, Hims was a big motherfucker.
He was a big boy.
So as he's going through these adolescent years, like they started calling him Igor.
Because he's a big dude.
Yeah.
Even as a little kid, he was
Even
a big
at 11.
dude.
Yeah, they were making fun of his size and how uncoordinated he is. And
Yeah, you're gangly.
And they always used to say like how slow he was and he wasn't quick and it took forever for him to do anything. And so, you know, he's being bullied by his own siblings.
Yeah.
And his siblings are, you know, enforcing this bullying at school. Mm-hmm. So instead of, you know, his big brother protecting him, which
He's feeding into
it.
I mean, classic middle child.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong.
So this is also where Keith's dad singles him out and treats him differently. So at age 11, so his brother Bruce is older and his brother Brad is younger, but Les starts making them work for him, and he pays them like $1 something an hour, I think it was. But he also starts charging the boys rent.
At 11.
At 11.
I thought he only made Keith.
Oh no, he made all 3 boys pay rent. But then he let Bruce and Brad stop. Mm-hmm. And Keith later found out, like, it would have been like 6 more weeks that Keith was paying rent. And he found out from Bruce and Brad that they weren't paying rent anymore. And so Keith went to his mom to be like, what the fuck? Mm-hmm. Why am I paying? And Gladys basically made Les stop. And when Keith asked for his money back, Les was like, no, take this as a learning experience.
That's something that Les says a lot to Keith.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
learning experience.
imprinted on him.
Heavily. He's supposed to be learning all these lessons from dear old dad.
Oh, no.
So he eventually gets accepted into a group of friends, right? And these boys, the sweethearts that they were.
Don't even use that word.
They
Devil children.
were big into torturing animals. Mm-hmm. They would nail crows, cats, and small dogs to a board and then throw knives at them or stick them with screws and nails. They would also tie 2 cats together by their tails, hang them over a rope, and then watch them fight until one of them died, and then would sit there and wait for the other one to die from its wounds.
Evil.
They would set fires, and they once burned down a neighbor's house on accident. And here's the kicker about this. Les makes Keith pay the neighbor back, right?
For the house
that he burned down. And then the neighbor laughs it off and is like, I'm glad they burned it down.
I'm going to collect on the insurance.
Insurance money. And then Keith was like, well, are you going to pay me back? And they're like, no.
Oh, man.
And
Chilliwack had such great people.
This is just another lesson learned for Keith.
Well, thank God they eventually, well, I don't know, thank God is the word I would use, but they eventually moved away from Chilliwack to
Silo?
Silo?
I think it was Silo or Sela,
like
Washington.
the singer Silo?
CeeLo Green?
CeeLo Green?
CeeLo Green?
I can't think of any of his songs.
I remember when I lost my mind.
There it is.
Lost my soul, your soul. Let go.
That was, okay.
Okay, I think
that was good.
I think we're all so,
we all good here? Okay.
It was beautiful singing.
Sorry.
They moved in 1967, and this was a big business move. Les was offered a job working in the hop industry in the United States, which at this point was kind of becoming a huge, booming business. So, you know, we all know about IPAs and super hoppy beers. He was part of it. He had invented some machine that made collecting the hops or processing the hops, I don't remember, easier. So, you know, they moved to the United States, and
once again, this doesn't really go all that well for
Keith.
He thought it would change, and it didn't.
He was really hoping that this would kind of give him a new start and he'd be able to make friends, but he was teased relentlessly in school.
Made fun of for his Canadian accent.
Yep.
Made fun of her size.
Yep. And then, once again, his brothers aren't helping.
Well, I mean, brothers don't help, but still.
I feel like so if I looked at all the old pictures of Keith, I feel like it's worth noting that Keith is not an unattractive man.
No.
He's not an unattractive child. As a matter of fact, as a young teenager, he was very handsome. He was very handsome.
Yep.
So it's not as if like he's this
I think
ogre.
he lacked the self-confidence to go with it.
And the social skills and stuff.
And I think he was probably self-conscious of his size, so I'm sure he hunched, and I'm sure he was very like...
I also wonder if the kids were fucking terrified because he was a big dude.
And that's why they picked on him.
And that's why they picked on him to have like a power play.
Probably.
Kids do that.
Kids are assholes.
Kids are mean. So in 7th grade, around the age of 13 to 14, Keith finally makes a friend, Tom Hager.
What a great friend.
And this friend introduces Keith to shoplifting.
Way
and
go, Tom.
shows him how to steal. So they're at this store, and while Tom is stealing like tools and pieces of metal and things that he can scrap to make money, Keith is over here stealing candy bars.
As kids do.
And sweets and, normal things that children would think to pick up. Well, the shop owner stops them, and they're picked up by the cops. The cops take them to the station and fingerprint them and book them. And then the cops tell them, like, okay, you have to tell your parents. Like, that's, don't do this. You're going to go down the wrong path. But you have to tell your parents. I want your parents to talk to us about it.
And Gladys and Les are out of town at this time.
Les and Gladys get home, and Keith admits what he did, admits that he was wrong.
Well, he's ashamed. The way he described it, he was like, it's kind of bursting out of him.
Be upset.
Yeah. He knew what he was doing is wrong. And that's also a theme for Keith.
He has a sense of morality and like he's not a total apathetic, no feeling.
He's not what you think of when you think of a psychopath. Mm-hmm.
He would have like fits of rage, but then followed by guilt.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. So he knows this is wrong. He knows he's going to get in trouble, and he's dreading it. So he's just like, I'm just going to get it over with. Well, Les calls Tom's father, and Tom blamed everything on Keith. Said that Keith was a bad influence and, convinced him to do it. And Keith is pretty sure that Les is going to beat the absolute shit out of him. He doesn't. Les drives him to the shop, makes him apologize to the owner, and then says he's going to be in here every day for 2 weeks to work for you. Do whatever you want to him, essentially.
Which is a mild punishment by Les standards.
It really is.
It's not an unreasonable punishment.
No.
I would probably do something.
I think that's a very valid punishment.
No, but that's what I mean. Like, Les didn't beat the shit out of him. He taught him a lesson.
Yeah.
Which is weird for Les to do.
But, I mean...
Maybe because he was in the States now? He wasn't in Chilliwack?
I don't know. Or maybe because Keith is 13, 14 years old and he's a big mamma jamma.
Yeah, he was getting big at that point.
So, regardless, what happens from this point is now word is like getting out amongst the small community that the Jespersons...
especially that Keith.
He's
bad
problematic.
Influence.
Those Canadians.
Them Canucks.
God damn it.
That was a lot of hostility
that was
towards
really
Canadians.
aggressive.
There was a lot of anger in that one.
So, poor Keith is all on his lonesome again. And in 8th grade, he begins dreaming of becoming a part of the Royal Mounted Police Force.
He wants to be a Mountie.
Yeah, so even though he lives in America and stuff now,
he misses Canada.
He loved Canada.
Yes.
And that's a theme that continues throughout his life. Canada will forever be his home.
Yeah.
He begins torturing stray cats with his BB gun and is basically picking off any in the neighborhood where they live that he can. He's like, I'm just going to take care of this stray cat problem, kill them all with BB guns. And in 1969, he must be real fucking bored.
Yeah.
He shoots an arrow with an exploding tip at the home of one of his teachers and then runs away.
He had a lot
Gotta
of
hoof it,
fascination
guys.
with
Let's
fire.
go. Kick up them feet.
So,
Don't you know?
Peter, let's get at her.
That was very like Wisconsin, North Dakota.
Oh,
Yeah, well,
North Dakota.
North Dakota,
Was it
don't you
North
know?
Dakota? I'm
don't
sorry.
you know?
Oh, it's a real fine guy.
I don't know. I think there's a fine line between Wisconsin and Canadian. They just say a lot more in Canada.
His paternal grandfather also really liked fire.
And also taught his father to kill and torture animals.
Yes.
And also had alcoholism and also had anger issues.
I see a pattern.
But no one talked about the fire thing.
No.
Like the fire thing was just like, oh yeah.
They
we don't
didn't talk about
that.
anything that was remotely shameful or they were.
Okay, so his great grandfather's brother.
Oh, we didn't talk about the brother.
No, we didn't.
Okay, so there might be there is a history of mental illness in their family. So Arthur, the great grandpa, the grandpa, he actually had a brother who was clinically insane.
Yep.
And when Les did research much later on in life, he found that some of the exact same things that Keith did as a young boy, this brother was also doing.
Isn't his name Charlie?
I can't remember what his name was.
Charles or Charlie.
But he eventually got sick of being in the system and decided the best way to commit suicide was to drive a 3-inch nail into his skull.
He
Probably not the
hammered.
quickest option.
He hammered a nail into his own head. He hammered a nail into his own head.
But he...
I mean, that's commitment.
And they said,
oh, God.
I should have
said-
been like, no,
I'm
FaceTime
uncomfortable.
They said when they found him, there was only like half an inch of the nail sticking out of his head. So not only did he drive a nail into his own head, he like drove it in there.
Okay, so like, I know that we're trying to be like super like factual, but I'm just imagining a cartoon of this. Like, how the fuck do you sit there and just hammer?
Well, he
a
was-
fucking
I mean, he
nail
was
in
in-
your
He had to do it.
head?
He had to have gotten it in one go. He
Oh,
had to
yeah.
have gotten it in one go.
Okay, moving on. From
I'm
that.
uncomfortable.
Yeah,
But
I'm super
anyways, so
uncomfortable.
he kept journals and made notes and stuff, believe it or not. And later on in life, Les was able to track them down and found a shit ton of stuff in there that was very similar to Keith, but also very similar to Les.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
just saying.
just throwing it
Little history
out there.
So Keith often said that when his father was away, the household was really quiet and peaceful and everyone kind of got along. There weren't any issues. But the second that Les came home, it became super tense, and Les's favorite method of punishment was using his leather belt. And Keith often took the blame for his brother's bullying of other kids. And Les would beat the shit out of him for bullying a kid that Keith hadn't actually bullied. His brothers had bullied. And even after his brother would confess and be like, no, it was me, Les
Still
would just turn to Keith and say, there's another lesson
There's
for
another
you.
lesson for it. In one particular case, one scenario, his brother had been bullying some kid. They got in a fight. The parent found out. Parent called home to the Jespersons. Keith answered. They exchanged words. The parent asked for Keith's name. Then that parent said Keith was the one who beat up his son.
Right.
They called back later, talked to Les, and Les beat the fuck out of Keith because
Why
Les
try to get your facts straight?
less
So
logic.
what I'm hearing is that both the brothers and Les took full advantage of the fact that Keith was this quiet, reserved, shy kid.
100%.
And that Keith never got up the goal to really stand up to his own family.
And what have we always learned about the quiet, shy kid, man? They can only go
Fucking
so
downer,
far.
man.
Yeah.
Fucking downer.
They can everybody has their limit. It's it's true. Everyone has their limit. And I'm not trying to find solidarity with Keith, but I'm just acknowledging that people can only take so much before they fucking snap.
Well, we did talk about how there were good times.
Yeah.
And Les would often take the boys on camping trips and hunting trips and things like that. So during one of these trips, Les is sitting there. I think it was called Fogo Island, I think is what the island was that they were hunting or fishing at. Basically, there's all these people sitting there, and Les is making fun of Keith while Keith is there about how Keith has all these girl troubles. He doesn't talk to girls. He doesn't know how to talk to girls. And this really upsets Keith. But during this trip, he actually ends up making out with 2 different girls on this trip. And so, but he's so nervous and doesn't know what to do that he doesn't really go any further with these girls. And one of these girls is 18. Like,
Yeah.
So he describes losing his virginity as an act of rape, but then concludes that he enjoyed it and wanted more of it and was a willing participant.
yeah. And not that it was an act of rape as in he raped someone, as in he was raped.
Yeah, but then when you hear the details of his story of his rape, I feel like that's him in his adult life trying to justify his behavior later in life. He was like, oh, well, I was raped. I'm like, bro, that's not how it went down.
That's not
like,
how it, I mean,
No.
So I feel like he was trying to almost like, you know how Kemper was really smart and he like diagnosed himself? Kind of feel like that's what Keith's trying to do, but he's like doing it all wrong.
Yeah, I
like
think that
missing it.
Yeah.
he's never accountable.
No.
Ever.
It's always someone else.
So he doesn't understand what's happening, but he's losing his virginity. And it's not that he's being raped, he just doesn't understand what's going on.
Because he was 14 and this girl was 18.
But he enjoyed it. He was a willing participant, and I think he kept or tried to keep in contact with that girl, but she eventually moved on to other things.
Yeah.
So he's already really interested in sex before this, but now he's kind of becoming obsessed with it. And he gets back to school and he notices that the guys on the football team are having a lot of luck with girls. So he's like,
Football.
I'm gonna go out for football. But he doesn't like playing football. His coach just wants him to be on tackle because he's a big
dude.
motherfucker. Like, he's
Can't
a
stop
big
him.
dude. But Keith doesn't enjoy tackling. He doesn't understand why his coach wants him to hurt other players.
Because you're giant.
Yeah. So during a game, he finally gets to play, and he actually really hurts 2 other players on the opposing team. I think he actually broke the ribs of one of the kids on the other opposing team. And Keith is just like, yeah, no, I don't want to do this if you're going to make me hurt people. And the coach basically calls him a pussy.
Oh,
Yeah. The coach basically calls him a pussy, and he quits the team. He's like, the coach would always call him a girl, would call him a lady.
But then in
and-
return, he goes out for wrestling, which is just as equally aggressive as football.
You don't,
could be.
I mean, you need to have a mean streak, but it's not as there's not as much physical retribution if you...
I had a cousin that had his sternum broke wrestling, so don't tell me that's just
Well,
not as aggressive.
My brother...
If you're comparing wrestling to football, though,
Yeah.
I
Like-
mean, they're very aggressive, but in very different ways.
Yes.
I
that is
feel like
accurate.
with wrestling, like, while yes, it is aggressive, there's some thought behind it, and it's not just
But,
Yeah.
but was there in the 60s? I know there is
Yeah.
now, but they didn't have padding like you did in football even in the 60s. I don't know. I feel like there's like, it's trading one evil for another.
Well, he was definitely better at
Not that
wrestling.
football's evil, by the way.
She's like, wait, no, I love football. No,
Don't hate on us. We love sports. It's fine.
He joins the wrestling team, finds out he's actually pretty good. He makes the varsity team and the B squad team. He gets his driver's license, and he still doesn't have any fucking friends. So he's wrestling, working, and then in his free time, he's hunting.
I think him working is important.
Yes.
All this man knows is
work.
work.
Yeah.
He's worked his entire life, and he will continue to work his entire life.
Yeah.
And he despises times where he can't work.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So working is and that actually I think plays into what his social ineptitude is, because his father makes him work for him so much that he doesn't have the same
Yeah.
opportunities to
so
socialize.
while his brothers are working, along with Les, and they do have jobs, they have a lot more socialization going on than Keith. Keith is very much like his dad's minion.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, his dad's little helper.
Yeah,
He's
his daddy's little helper.
He's his loyal dog.
Yeah.
That does the I think that's the other thing. Oh, guys, stop. Don't make that face. I know. We haven't even talked about Duke yet.
But I don't want to talk about Duke.
So there's this one really sad thing about Keith. And Keith had this loyal dog.
Broke my
This
heart.
chocolate lab.
That was Duke would hunt. Duke was Keith's everything for years.
Duke was Keith's only friend.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's how Keith describes him. He was his only friend. Keith had him since he was a puppy. He would sleep in Keith's bed. He would go wherever Keith went. Duke was there with him.
Mm-hmm. And he was importante.
Yes. So Duke makes it to 14 years old.
Mm-hmm. Pretty old for a lab.
He's old for a lab, and he's dragging. He's having a hard time getting up and down. And Keith is just like, yep, you're my baby, and would just pick him up and put him wherever he needed to be. Mm-hmm. Well, Keith comes home from school one day and is looking for Duke. And Keith's dad is like, yeah, I shot him.
Well, he said he took him hunting and that he was really struggling and he couldn't keep up, so he just put him out of his misery.
Yeah.
But Keith believes that his dad murdered his best friend.
Oh, he told his dad that you murdered my best friend. And in retribution to this, he began mistreating his dad's dogs, like as revenge.
And animals just in general after that.
I mean, he's always tortured animals,
but
now
specifically cats. He
Yes.
he always loved dogs.
Yes, dogs were welcome at the Jesperson household. But what I find really interesting about Les is that he had small dogs. Mm-hmm. Like Les would have like part poodles and Yorkies and like small dogs.
Which is weird for a hunter, because usually hunters, you want like your pointers, your labs, you know, your hunting dogs.
He would have smaller dogs. And Keith wouldn't like physically abuse the dogs, but he would be mean to them. Yeah. Like yell at them, scare them. They just knew to leave him alone.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he was like
bears.
6 foot at this point.
But this is something that sticks, like the death of Duke and how Duke died stays with Keith his entire life. That even
he never forgives Les for this.
Even at the time of him working together with Jack Olson for the book, it is still something that is visceral for him. All right, so
Keith is now 17, 18 years old. He is still
super horny,
but still doesn't know how to talk to girls, but begins fantasizing about rape and control of girls. He doesn't know how to talk to them. He doesn't know what to do. And in his mind, his only sexual experience is rape, quote unquote. And I remember one story he told in the book with Jack Olson that he was at a party and he began talking to some tiny little girl. She's like, I don't mean like little girl, I just mean she's a little person.
Well, he's 6'6", so everybody's tiny.
Yeah, at this point, he's probably what, like 6'4"?
Yeah.
And he said that she was like 5 something, like she's just this itty bitty little thing. And she literally tells him like, hell no, dude, like I couldn't stop you even if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And he doesn't understand this. Like this doesn't make sense to him. And this kind of triggers him to start fascinating, like, you mean I could just take it? Like I could just hold you down?
this kid who's never had control of anything in his life is just offered his first bit of control.
Yeah. And then to make
And then this happens.
matters worse, we're gonna check off another box here on the serial killer checklist.
How to make a serial killer. Smash their brain against stuff.
So,
Or fall from a really, really tall height.
So Keith is on the wrestling team, and he's really good at it. But there's this one thing during practice that he just can't manage, and that is reaching the top of the rope that they would have to climb for wrestling. He's never been good at it. He can't manage it. The other teammates are teasing him about it. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to fucking do this. So he finally makes it to the top of the rope, and the rope breaks loose from the bracket,
Because he's giant.
and Keith falls 25 feet to the hardwood gym floor, lands on his feet before crumpling and smashing his head against the floor. And the worst part is, the coach tells him to fucking get up and quit faking.
Oh, because he's shitting his ever-loving pants.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like, this is pure, the coach is projecting. The coach, I think, was telling him to not be a pussy because he's fucking terrified that he's gonna lose his job, that this kid is gonna have some serious damage done, and
so
panic mode.
Keith gets up. He feels horribly dizzy. His left side is killing him, and makes it to the locker room, gets himself dressed, and calls Gladys. And Gladys is like, what the fuck and takes him to the emergency room.
Could you even imagine finding out your kid fell 25 feet onto their head?
I would have murdered that coach.
Everyone
He would have
would be
been
dead.
fucking dead.
Like,
Nowadays, people would just sue the shit out of that
do they
school.
even allow the rope climbs?
They don't
in the
do
mall?
that anymore.
Yeah, I remember falling from the rope. I mean, I only climbed like 5 feet, but I mean,
I never had the upper body strength. I still don't have the upper body
I
strength.
could be like, eh.
I still have to use the assisted pull-up machine.
Can't do it.
It's fine.
So he goes to the emergency room and they tell him that he just has a severe sprain and it'll be better soon. Well, the swelling never goes down for Keith. Like his foot is fucked up. It's so fucked up that he has to cut like slits in his shoes to fit his foot into his shoes.
swollen.
And we're talking like a year of this.
that's fucking crazy.
And
to
Because
me.
he clearly shattered his ankle and
Yeah.
continued to walk onto it
So
and needed surgery later
he
in life.
finally goes back to the doctor and they have to do all this surgery to repair the bones and the ligaments in his foot. And this does lead the Jespersons to suing the school, and they won a settlement of $30,000, which then, surprise, surprise,
Less use
less
of it.
uses.
Fuck less.
But this injury killed Keith's dream of being a Mountie.
Yeah.
He can't join the police force anymore, and this just, it breaks Keith's heart because that's all he wanted to do.
Yep.
So he graduates high school in 1973. He graduated 161st out of 174 with an IQ of 102. And he wanted to go to college to be a game warden. And Les told him no, because game wardens don't make enough money. There's no money in that. But he said that he didn't think that Keith could do college, but sent all 4 other children to the colleges of their choice.
And then justifies it later. Well, Keith just didn't do that well in school. School wasn't for him. The kid wanted to go to fucking college, man.
If he wants to go, send him.
And honestly, like, if we're looking at Keith's history, I think Keith probably would have done well in college because it would have been something that he wanted to do.
I think it would have been good because he would have been away from Les and his control.
Yes.
I think he would have been able to find his own control by being able to pick his minors and his majors and what he wanted to work
that Les
in.
didn't want Keith to go to college because he liked having a lackey.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
I
he
agree
did.
with
He
you.
used Keith a lot. Like when Keith finally saved up and was able to buy himself a motorcycle.
All right. Well, if you like our podcast and you listen on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 4 or 5-star. Don't leave us a 4-star review. What the fuck am I saying? Leave a 5-star review. God damn it.
We are
Nothing less
fucking
than
awesome.
5.
There's nothing less than 5. And
Unacceptable.
tell us we're pretty and you like us and you just want to hear the sounds of our voices.
But even if you have constructive criticism, like by all means, leave constructive criticism. We cannot make our podcast better if we don't know what it is we need to fix.
And Chelsea will be really nice to you, and I'll just.
I will say that if you say we say fuck too much, you can fuck off.
Yes.
Yeah,
Fuck
agree
you.
with that. Fuck is our word.
Fuckity fuck.
They
All right.
sing it on the regular.
On the reg. So you can follow us on the Instagram at The Killer T, on Twitter at The Killer T, on YouTube.
Nah, we're not on YouTube
Okay,
yet.
getting
I'm
aggressive.
working on it, but my computer is not liking the uploading from iMovie to YouTube,
okay.
and I can't figure out why yet. I'm
Okay,
working on
we'll,
it.
we'll get there. So then.
And I still need the first
couple
episodes from
episodes.
you.
Sweet. Okay. So also, what's the other thing that we're doing? Facebook at The Killer T.
Yes.
That's all of our
So
socials.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you can find us there. Hit us up. Let us know what you
We didn't
think.
even do a palate cleanser, but y'all aren't gonna get a palate.
You're not
cleanser
getting a
this
palate
time.
cleanser today.
There's sushi waiting for us right across the street.
I'm real hungry.
I'm gonna get tummy cramps if I don't get some sushi.
Join us next week where we dive into part 2 of Keith Hunter Jesperson, the Happy Face Killer.
Just shove your face right in between and just.
I'm not deep throating the mic.
No, in between, like just like that.
Motorboating the mic.
But don't motorboat them with your face, just your voice. Yeah.
I'm in a store and I'm singing.
I'm in a store and I'm singing. What we have found is that touching this is what creates the most interference. Yes.